Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Building the Confidence to Connect with Zero Trust Edge Security. My name is Sarah Bodine, and I'm happy to be your moderator today. Before we get started, I wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping items. You'll see a Q&A option at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please use this to submit any questions you might have. We'll be sure to save time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions. If we run out of time and can't get to all of the questions live, we'll follow up via email. And then this webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand. And now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers. Chris Schoenfield is a member of Accenture Security. He's developed and led the global IT and OT cybersecurity and technology programs in oil and gas, where he spent 20 years with operators prior to joining Accenture. He was accountable for the IT-OT relationship while also responsible for the security posture, architecture, and design of the IT-OT ecosystem, where he led the organization's risk-based approach to increasing availability while reducing the overall attack surface of OT environments. In addition, Chris continues to move the conversation forward surrounding critical infrastructure protection, IT-OT convergence, and industrial IoT, providing guidance and insights into strategies for successful and achievable outcomes. Ahmed Khalil. Ahmed is the America's Business Development Lead at Lanner Electronics, responsible for industrial IoT business growth strategies and technology partnerships across various market segments, including manufacturing, utilities, and transportation. Prior to Lanner, he held different global roles in sales and marketing with multinational organizations in the electrical and industrial automation industry. And then finally, Jason Shepard is the VP of Ecosystem at ZEDEDA. And prior to joining ZEDEDA, Jason was CTO for the Dell Technologies Edge and IoT Solutions Division. His proven track record as a thought leader in the market is evidenced through his leadership building up the award-winning Dell IoT Solutions Partner Program and establishing the vendor-neutral open-source EdgeX Foundry project to facilitate greater interoperability at the IoT edge. And with that, I'll hand things over to Jason to kick things off.
All right, thanks, Sarah. I was joking before we got started that we're all wearing blue. We got the memo apparently, and funny too is that first page it like follows the gradient of the blue. So yeah, we're well coordinated here. So what we're going to do, so we're going to start with just some kind of high level context, and then we'll dive into sort of a mini panel discussion on key considerations when you're talking about security, and actually the people part is one of the big ones, not just the technology. And then we'll have some short pitches on what we're kind of bringing to the table respectively, and then summarize. So as Sarah said, definitely feel free to ask questions as we go, drop into the chat. We'll have time at the end for live Q&A as well. So just building this out, I mean, this is about kind of what's the progression that we're seeing over time. I mean, Internet of Things was a hot topic about 2015. Right now, the hot topic is edge computing, and that's driven by just the sheer amount of data that we're seeing out on networks. But it's not to say the Internet of Things is done with. It's just you're just seeing more and more of those types of devices. Where things are headed is we think it's around this notion of data confidence and trust. Interconnected ecosystems where you have supply chain with trusted relationships with different providers, whether it's in your city with the citizens in that city, crossover into the home, different retailers, utilities, all of the above. For that, you have to have an open foundation. So the root of what we're going to be talking about is about open, transparent foundation, and then you build commercial value prop around it. So more and more compute everywhere is also a major trend, but super important that we get to that open common foundation. I mean, imagine if the internet was owned by one company. So the other big thing here is that edge is a continuum. So when we're talking today, we are specifically getting into what we call the distributed edge, which is any kind of compute that's deployed outside of a physically secure data center. Hold on a second. Yeah, I just lost my screen. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, my screen. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so any kind of compute deployed outside of a physically secure data center. So this could be, on the factory floor, in a retail shop. We're going to be talking heavily about industrial today. That could be a server class workload, a gateway. It could be embedded inside of something like a wind turbine or a connected machine. We'll talk about a pump example today. So the distributed edge is this spectrum here, below what you would maybe call the network edge, what service providers are offering as the clouds come down. It could be any number of use cases. Of course, industrial IoT or IoT in general is one of them. Edge AI, we're going to be obviously talking about security today, networking, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well within the Lanner portfolio. But just to set context on where we're focused, these are the types of environments that we're talking about. Server class, embedded compute, but then of course, how do you secure these environments, whether they're inside of a factory or out in the field? So there's just a lot of considerations here, and the challenges here really come into play because when you get at the distributed edge, when you get outside of centralized data centers, everything gets more and more complex. The closer you get to the physical world, the more challenges you're going to see around diversity of hardware and software. You've got a mixture of skill sets, both OT and IT in the field. You need to be able to manage those things remotely. You have new security threat vectors. When you do not have 4 secure walls around your data center equipment, you don't necessarily have a network perimeter. You need to do network segmentation and various different practices that we'll talk about. You might not even own the network that you deploy on. So you need a zero trust security model once you get outside of those centralized data centers. And then there's just the scale factor in terms of things being geographically dispersed. And it's just expensive to roll trucks out to the field. So you need to make sure that you've got the right orchestration foundation. How do you right infrastructure, and then you deploy your apps and whatnot on top with the right domain knowledge. So yeah, very, very purpose built. We'll talk a bit more about what ZEDEDA does to help here, and of course the other guys will talk about how we round out that full solution. So that's setting that context. I don't know why my camera stopped. Oh, there we go. Okay, so setting that context, we'll dive into just some key thoughts around how do you approach securing these types of solutions, whether it's industrial IoT or edge. Maybe I'll hand it off to you, Chris, just in terms of talking about some of the priorities that you guys see. Obviously, you work a lot with these two camps, and I'm gonna let's maybe just have an open discussion about what we're seeing out there and what are those key considerations.
Sure. So to start, seeing the IT and the OT convergence happening and then bringing in the IoT with it. The complication that starts there is the IT teams have to really think about how prescriptive they are in the way they approach things to really bring the business along, because we know the business is going to solution with or without you from an IT perspective, right? And if we want the business to come along with IT and have at least that 80% lens of telemetry you need and security you need, the IT has to evolve more into the approach of giving the business the flexibility they need for the types of deployments, but also here are the boundaries on there, right? And so really trying to transform, security as a business enabler, right? So if security is involved early in the ecosystem, then they can really take that approach on helping the business define, what are the capabilities we're going to need in the broad spectrum of IoT we maybe intend to leverage in the OT world. And then once you understand those capabilities, you define that, then you can move on to the things like, okay, what's the scalability of this? What is the sustainability of this? And then how are we going to secure it? And so, at Accenture, that's what we're doing when we're working with clients, and we have both ends of the spectrum from a Android open model that really gives an enterprise the ability to bridge that technical debt to the technologies they have, leverage the enterprise investments on those solutions they're already using, and then deploy in that manner, from someone who doesn't maybe have all those things and have that investment and needs a more turnkey type solution. So we see that entire spectrum there, but that's I would say at its highest level, that's the premise of the conversations we're having. And then as we go down into it, we really start looking at the solutioning and trying to get the OT IT conversation about what the use cases are, so they can shape that for scale.
I mean, yeah, and you know, like you said, so very different needs. You know, if you've followed like in the IT world, there's the CIA or whatever model, the different priorities, and as you guys can see here, I mean, it's OT cares about uptime. You know, they care about safety, so their availability is super important, and IT cares at the top about the data availability. Hey, sorry, you know, you couldn't send your email or get to LinkedIn or whatever, but in the OT world, there's immediate impact if there's a breach. You know, production. I mean, you could lose like $20,000 a minute, you know, in an airplane factory, you know, or risk to safety. In the IT world, breaches tend to have very long tails. You know, like a credit card hack, years plays out at great scale. So it's just a very different set of considerations, and that's why you have to approach from both sides. You know, Amin, any thoughts kind of on just the priorities and how you guys
Yeah,
are
no,
approaching things?
exactly. And just to add to that, like, you know, the OT security used to be like, you know, siloed, and they didn't really have a lot of, back in the time, they used to kind of call it kind of more of an air gap to the IT. But as we see, like, you know, the industrial companies kind of like, you know, leveraging the newer technologies and digital to drive operation efficiency. So we started seeing like, you know, some of that, like, you know, Chris mentioned, convergence is happening. And one of the really good practices, you know, being deployed to kind of like, you know, add that extra layer of segregation and inspection is the industrial demilitarized zone, right? The DMZ, right? Which is really good and absolutely is recommended. Like I said, it adds this kind of like extra layer of not allowing like, you know, the direct connection between the standard IT equipment and OT, but we also kind of need to be aware of the fact that it's much a broader ecosystem to build that proper OT-oriented security, right? One classic example, like, you know, when you're talking about demilitarized, like, you know, zone to add that extra segregation and separation between IT and OT, right? Classic, like, you know, way to kind of bridge that DMZ is the media devices, right? You just carry them around, and you can use like an engineer or contractor using the USB to load up projects or import export projects, right? Things like that. And another way, like, you know, we see a lot, you know, a lot more vendors kind of offering that remote access, right? So one of the common practices is the VPN, which is fantastic IT solution, but is it really gonna good for OT? Well, not necessarily, right? So you might be granting access, like, you know, to a technical staff and a vendor, right? Here you go. So you have now, like, you know, the end of your tunnel is not like super secure. So in general, kind of like, you know, to sum it up, so in general, when you're talking about that OT IT conversion security, we think of them as kind of like, you know, in two buckets, right? One way is like, you know, to think about it is like your inherited security features, your built in, right? And this is where kind of like Lanner contribute to the system in terms of like, you know, device security, right? Having like, you know, hardware root of trust, right? With the TPM to make sure all your firmware and your software stack is kind of like, you know, verified across the various stages. We also kind of like, you know, see in some of the popular standards, you guys might have heard of the International Society of Automation and IAC. They recommend to have that built-in inherent type of security features, role-based access to the device functionalities and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to elaborate more as we kind of go through the slides.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. It starts.
Slides.
I've talked with a lot of platform providers, you know, software platform providers. I'm like, oh yeah, I've got TLS. It's cool. Not so much, you know, this whole notion of defense in depth. And so, yeah, we're going to get into detail. But one of the things, you know, this slide, I mean, you mentioned, Ahmed, it's historically OT networks have been isolated for a reason. There's a lot of existing infrastructure. I mean, Chris, you mentioned, you know, that need to, you know, support technical debt or, you know, legacy assets and whatnot. But you know, the value of industrial IoT is to connect formerly unconnected systems to drive business outcomes. It's not necessarily that everything goes to the cloud. You could still be on-prem, but, you know, historically the process control systems and even, you know, going forward, they'll be isolated for protection, but you need that segmentation, you know, as Ahmed was saying, like in various different layers, not only within an OT network, but also punching over through a DMZ to the IT side if there's collaboration happening, and we're always better off if these two sides are collaborating. But let's face it, sometimes all the data is going to still remain on the OT side. It could be completely bypassing IT, go up to the cloud, or stay on-prem. But we've got to provide the tools that work in all levels here, whether you're deploying a simple IoT gateway, maybe doing some pre-processing, maybe you're deploying a dedicated security node. So these are some of the patterns we see, doing segmentation or protocol inspection, workload consolidation. It could be apps on the OT side, or maybe on the IT side. It's not to say one or the other does things, but it's about the principles of how you do the defense in depth. Cloud gateway, as we say here, this would be like a network provider coming down and providing that secure access that puts data out of a factory, so to speak. All of these same patterns apply for field assets, but when you get in the four walls of a factory or some sort of refinery or whatever, you have these dynamics and psychology kicks in between OT and IT organization. There's historical challenges just in terms of what people do in the different realms of the organization, and so the tools need to work across the board. Chris, any thoughts kind of on that?
Yeah, even to elaborate more, some of the things we're seeing is people come from a pilot and then start really looking at how they're going to plug this use case and solutioning into their current network in OT, right? And some of those conversations, it's nothing new, but zones and conduits. If you're not really mature in your OT journey, looking at a zones and conduits model from a network design to start bringing in IoT based on risk profile, you could wind up with a zone of IoT or industrial IoT, and then you could have multiple conduits on how you're crossing that to secure it. So the same things you're saying as people are encountering, and kind of what we talked about in the beginning is you can pilot a lot of things. When you go to scale it, you need to be looking at the whole picture, right? And really what that's going to look like.
Yeah, cool. So a big question in there's some folks who, you just secure the one aspect, and so do you secure the data, kind of wrap the data itself, and then it can flow anywhere it wants to go? Do you secure the network or the node itself, the edge compute devices, the assets themselves? Of course, the answer is, as we all know, is all of the above, and it's about not one single thing. And we'll talk about a lot of these technologies, I think, as we go. And ZEDEDA, we do our part. Lanner, Accenture kind of wraps it all together in this relationship from a services standpoint. And Chris will talk about some of that. But as Amin said, I mean, it's really important to get down into the silicon level, so you can trust the devices that are out there. There's a lot of folks out there deploying solutions that security is a cost center. They're thinking about it after the fact or not at all. It's important that you get down to silicon level. You make it to where you can't log into the box locally. I mean, like you said, there's people are literally sticking in USB keys and pulling data out to get it across the DMZ or wherever, and that's not really the best way to do things, because that's when stuff happens. So all of these details, as we get into the solutions, it's not any one thing. And then the really important part is to make it usable. If you don't make it usable, then people tend to try to bypass things, and that's why all the reason why we're trying to simplify that in a joint partnership. But other thoughts, kind of on just the general tools. I mean, I think a lot of this will come out more and more as we talk about the respective parts of the solution. But other thoughts on how this all comes together?
Yeah, I would say the ability of someone getting deep diving into your IoT solution and your use cases, and finding out if that solution can help you leverage your investments in your enterprise you have now, and then what is the capability from a software defined perspective to make that device really powerful. And if you're not able to leverage your enterprise investments, can you do all the security right there, or are you able to meet those inhibitors within your enterprise and compliance with your own devices, and then be able to carry that forward? So those are things I would say to look for that the stack offers you with the open edge.
Just to kind of elaborate a little bit further in terms of the security investments, one of the common questions that we get, how much do I really need to invest in my asset security? And one rule of thumb that we recommend is kind of like think of it as your supply and demand, kind of like, basic economic graph, right? Where you have in your y-axis, like, your risk probability or your threat probability, and then the x-axis, right, your level of security. So as you increase, obviously, like, level of security kind of drops, but you also have, like, your cost significantly increasing. So what is that optimal point where you just to balance that probability with the cost? And we always kind of recommend saying, like, never invest into your infrastructure and into an asset, right, more than the value of the assets itself. So it's a trade-off, right? It's just looking at that, just looking at all those factors in terms of, like, the threat, the detection, the vulnerabilities, right, and how is that, the consequences, how is that going to impact your production? So this is just, like, one of the ways. And like I said, looking in general at your security buckets, right, built in, starting from the hardware to have that fundamental component level of security, and then you take it up. And the second level is kind of like, more of an add-on. And I think everybody's kind of familiar, because we all talk about the, antivirus, firewall, intrusion detection and prevention system. So it's kind of combination of all those. And like I said, the cost is kind of balanced versus the asset value and the impact on the production.
Yeah, production and safety and all that. And I'll add, like, so a lot of the, obviously there's been publicized, issues in production. I mean, everyone knows the Stuxnet things and some other stuff like that, which actually partly because people could access things, internal to the system, insider stuff. But you also look at, consumer is a great example. So most of the IoT breaches that we hear about are on consumer, like, cameras that get hacked into with, like, literally under 20 combinations of username and password, got into millions of cameras a few years ago. And then that took down with the DDoS attack, took down the net up in the Northeast. The reason why that happens is people don't apply security measures, make it too easy to bypass it. First off, change your username and password, or actually don't even have one, which is part of what ZEDEDA does with EVOS on the box. But the other thing is that defense net. So had you, the reason why they do that in the consumer sense is that people don't want to think about security. They want an instant gratification. So you've got to right size the security policies, make it usable, match the risk profile, but that usability, is super important. And then the defense in depth, those cameras that once they got hacked and they started going, reverse trafficked with DDoS, if you had some intelligence locally that said, wait a minute, that's not right, it could have shut all of those down at the source versus, attacking, a centralized location and taking down the network. So really important to approach it holistically, but then also, match the risk profile. Because again, security is a cost center. So you got to make sure that you right size investments, I think, to your point. So let's dive into, kind of what we're bringing to the table respectively. And then, again, ask questions as we go. We're going to go pretty quick on this section because we want to make sure that we have time for Q&A at the end. So what does ZEDEDA do as part of this? So we're all about orchestration of edge computing nodes, so distributed edge outside of physically secure data centers, out in the field. That it's very, very fragmented, as mentioned. It takes a lot of different tools. And we're all about how do we build that security from the hardware layer up, and how do I do that in a way where I can use any combination of applications? So a lot of people are doing containers today, but there's also a lot of legacy stuff out there. Windows-based applications, whether it's Astorian, SCADA, HMI, etc. You need to have that kind of transition and support your existing investments. So ZEDEDA, all about orchestration, management, and security of the hardware and any application on top, any combination of VMs, Docker containers, virtual machines, Kubernetes clusters, you name it. Completely not in the data path. You send the data wherever you want it to go, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. And it's built on an open foundation. So EVOS is part of Linux Foundation's LF Edge project. Think of EVOS as doing for this distributed edge computing what Android did for mobile. Completely, universal base, build an ecosystem around it, both hardware and software, prevent lock-in to anybody, including our own commercial orchestration cloud, sold as SaaS. You choose. And it's really important from not only a transparency standpoint, but also that open foundation to get to the point that we talked about up front. These interconnected ecosystems and that trust factor. So that's kind of the gist of what we do. I won't go into all the details here, but on the left side, this is our commercial subscription-based cloud service, really focused on usability for reasons mentioned. You've got to simplify things for that mix of skill sets in the field. On the right side, this would be an edge computing node. It could be a gateway, a server, hub, router, whatever you want to call it, but it's any hardware, any combination of silicon, including things like GPUs and FPGAs. But EVOS is that universal abstraction layer. It's Linux based, but it's not just Linux. Just like Android is not just Linux. Android's got JVMs and different things, but EVOS is very curated to support the needs, not only from a zero trust security model, but also whatever applications you want. There's many solutions out there that are only container based or they're agent based, meaning that agent runs on your choice of OS. But if you do that, you're generally not getting into those deeper hardware aspects. If you don't curate the operating system to tie into the hardware, things like root of trust or TPM, things like that, you're going to have security vulnerabilities. You'll also, if you have an agent-based solution versus bare metal like EVOS, you are likely to corrupt that device during updates, because you don't have that foundation below. So that's EVOS. It's got other features that we'll talk about, and then we leverage the open orchestration API developed within the Linux Foundation project, Project Eve, for our cloud. The way this works, you could have no experience. You grab a box with EVOS on it. We're working with a bunch of providers like Lanner, to support it from the factory. You plug in power and networking. It creates a crypto-based ID from the TPM. Now you can no longer log into the box on your own. Because you have to go through the console in the back end with full role-based access control. And then it gets secure dial tone to the back end, and you start deploying apps. We have an app marketplace that includes both public applications, popular apps and open source things as well. Or you could create a private app store for your business. Full visibility into the hardware, at scale. Distributed firewall, that diagram with the segmentation, we can guarantee that this app can only talk to that cloud, this app can only talk to that app on that box, shut down ports remotely, all kinds of different things that are really important enablers. And then of course there's other tool sets on top. I'll say that EVOS, this is an architecture, won't get into all the details, but there are 2 copies of EVOS running at all times on a box. B partition is where the updates happen in that second copy. Only if it's updated does it flip over to the A partition. Otherwise, it keeps running the way it was. So that notion of uptime is really addressed here. Your choice of hypervisor, any combination, in terms of legacy apps, Kubernetes, Azure IoT Edge, Greengrass, etc. I talk about a lot of these things, but it's really about these layers, no passwords locally. That USB key things, like we can literally enable someone to shut down all the USB ports locally, so you can't do that, and you exchange data properly through segmented networks. So just a lot of features, more detail online, but the key point here is built from the silicon up and make it really easy to use. I talked through sort of like the onboarding elements. So zero touch provisioning, very important. Mix the skill sets in the field. You need to have it to where it's flexible for anyone to install. Updates. I can update EVOS. I can update any guest OS on top. I can update the applications themselves. We have that marketplace as mentioned, and that sandboxing, the AB partition is critical. And then this notion of eventual consistency. You set the intended state for all the applications in the cloud console. Whenever the box can phone home, it always phones home. You never have the cloud talk to the box, because it's a security no-no. It can work through firewalls and whatnot. It says, hey, what am I supposed to have on me? These are the updates. It downloads them if it can. It updates in the B partition. Only if successful, it flip over to the A partition. So completely architected for autonomous operation in the field and maintaining uptime. I also mentioned, the apps, we can dedicate things through distributed firewall. We can say you can't talk to this cloud, disable ports, visualize network flows across your overall architecture. Very granular control software-defined control of where your data is going, and how you're working with that hardware below. So with that, I'll hand it off to Ahmed, to kind of talk about the Lanner portfolio and some of those kind of foundational elements that are so important.
Thanks, Jason. Next slide, please.
Oop, too many. Here we go.
Yeah, there was just a quick introduction of Lanner. So we're a global technology leader in the network security appliances and embedded computing system with experience of about 35 years. And we build and brand partner with industry leading companies in various industries, including the majority of the 500 Fortune listed companies. So our main manufacturing in Taiwan, and we serve our customers through a global network of regional hubs. In the Americas, we have local sales, engineering, project management offices in warehouse in Canada and US, and we have satellite office in Mexico, and then sales agencies for the South American market. And we have, like you see here on the top right, all the certification that you would expect from a global manufacturer. Next slide, Jason, please. Yeah, and this is just in general the kind of hardware solutions and platforms that we build for our partners. So in generally, we serve a kind of three broad markets, right? Starting at the top of the pyramid for the telecommunication platforms focused on virtualized computing and software-defined networks, and the kind of core data centers for the telecommunications. And then the IT, the network computing, like I said, it's a core business for us, firewall and network security appliances, which really differentiates us, like, when we're talking about that IT OT convergence, right? So we have a lot of expertise that we could leverage to bridge some of the gaps as we help our clients kind of build that security integrated IT and OT platforms. Then at the bottom here is, like, the focus of the webinar today is that ruggedized, fanless, windless, industrial grade type of edge computing for harsh environment. You could use it, like, across different industries, right? But the obvious ones are manufacturing, utilities, and transportation. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to get into a lot of details for this one here, but just to kind of show the breadth of our portfolio, that we cover kind of, like, broad range of use cases across different verticals. And as we kind of, like, do the application deep dive with Accenture and ZEDEDA, we started kind of, like, analyzing the requirements and recommending the solution. And like I said, talking about the IT and OT conversions today, we have a lot of expertise working, into the cybersecurity industry that we could leverage as we kind of, like, build or make a purpose-built hardware solutions, right? Different use cases, but those are kind of, like, the main markets that we're pursuing and actively participating in, including, like, industries and manufacturing, transportation. And this is, I think we covered a lot of content on that slide, but on the left-hand side, this is what you typically see as an industrial enterprise IT and OT setup, starting from level 0 and 2, like, at the production line factory, and the production line at the factory floor. Then you go up to the master controllers. It could be like RTUs, PLCs. Then your SCADA, your supervisory control systems. So this is kind of, like, mainly your OT level, and then the corporate network, like, for the head office and whatnot. For level 4, and it's very typical now you see level 5 for the cloud. And as we talk today, like, companies are trying to adapt more technologies and leverage digital to drive the business performance, and more convergence, more interdependencies, more collaboration happening between the IT and OT kind of groups. So when we look here at the distributed edge computing security, the good news is that a lot of the fundamental concepts that we have for the standard IT equipment are still kind of valid. And if you don't know where to start, they could be a good practical starting point. So we touched briefly on the hardware to establish that hardware root of trust establish that verification of your boot process at really base level, right? And make sure that you have an authenticated kind of like, authenticated process or configuration. And then this is like, it's just one of the very popular. So it's obviously the encryption and making sure that your data is secured and encrypted, whatever it is, sitting static in the storage or traveling across the network. Then segmentation, and Chris kind of briefly touched on that, right? And there's a lot of now technology to leverage with virtualization to basically break your big flat industrial network to more kind of manageable manageable pieces, right? So this is really common practice for industrial network owners to kind of like manage the different application traffic. So in case that you have a security breach in one zone, you make it much harder for the malicious code or the corrupted file to impact the rest of the zones, right? So this is like, you could get also at a more granular level, and you get a micro segmentation, and you start zoning out your workload streams, right? And you start kind of segregating maybe laterally communication between your intelligent devices, right, or server to server, or vertically going from the field and to the controllers, to the supervisory control SCADA, and then to edge, and in some instance to the cloud, right? So you're kind of like segmenting and kind of like establishing tweaked policies and access control, kind of like Jason, you already touched on that. Just the well-documented implemented procedures, policies, and internal controls to make sure, like understand who has access to what for how long, and what is the relevance to their roles and responsibilities. And common practice is the least privilege access, right, or the role-based access control. And finally, is the visibility and monitoring. So sorry, I think, hello?
We can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was gonna say, okay. And this is like, how we put it kind of all together, right? Working with our partners like ZEDEDA and Accenture, we can offer that full turnkey from consultation software and hardware. And those are kind of like, the pre-configured, pre-validated, ready-to-ship solutions to accelerate the time to value. And as I mentioned earlier, cybersecurity is core business for us, right? So we have the domain expertise working with the global cybersecurity businesses. I talked about like the trusted platform module to establish like the authentication from first step, and also like we talk a lot about the encryption codes and software and firewall and whatnot, but all of those tools are kind of nullified if you don't have a properly secured manufacturing process. So, and Lanner is like one of the first Taiwanese manufacturers got the ISO certification, right? And then the product obviously would have the flexibility to support the different application needs, right? And finally, we have ready solutions, like I said, to order and to support the different trials and pilot projects, right? And you can just go ahead to our website, and in our bundle solution, you can order free demos.
Cool. Yeah. We'll open up for questions here in a bit. Thanks, Ahmed. So with that, I'll, Chris, if you want to dive in on what you guys are doing
Sure.
with your practice, and then we'll kind of wrap up.
Yeah. Go ahead and go to the next one there. So real quick, just show you guys the breadth of security going on here is behind me. You see, we'll get into our Houston OT Security Cyber Fusion Center, but we have the entire spectrum to leverage across security and ecosystems within OT and then outside of OT as well. And that kind of gives you a global picture of what we're doing and just some of the partners we work with in that space, from automation to IT. Go to the next one. The ability to bring in all those players and have that expertise in every aspect of it, whether it's from OT networking, from IT networking, coming down into the security stack at the edge, or bringing it to the cloud, and then what it looks like in between. So deep technical knowledge in the cloud security from how IoT data is getting acquired, and where it's going from there. So just give you kind of a lens real quick here. If you're looking for that holistic picture, those are the things we're working with on our clients. Go to the next slide. Just real quick, some OT security perspectives we talk about. And, everyone's investing at the same time, right? Everyone's plugging in something Ethernet now. There's not enough people to do it. So organizations are having a hard time, how do you maintain that staff, or how do you maintain that organization, or where do you even get going from an OT security program? So you have that foundation to iterate on it. And that's what we're helping people with. You throw in IoT and industrial IoT in the mix, you just grow the attack surface, right? Just expanding it. And that's what we're talking about, going with IT OT convergence and that relationship, how important it is to be able to solution for your business, right? Like talk about those solutions where when the business brings you something they need to deploy or something they want to leverage, what kind of solutions do you have that will 80% of the time, there's no technical reason why they couldn't leverage it, right? And, Jason alluded earlier to the 2015 days, they're not over, Internet of Things, but in that world, everyone was creating full turnkey because they couldn't control the quality of what was going on. So they got in the hardware business, they got in the cloud business, they did the whole thing. You see a lot of those companies now starting to kind of unravel that back, pull back and become a software company, and then let the enterprises look for those solutions that they can manage and own what they want to do. So those are the things we're deep diving on. Same concept, security as a business enabler. How are you helping when the business has a solution, how do you get them to market faster? How do you reduce that friction? How do you take away those inhibitors? So a lot of things going on there, from us creating large industrial IoT assessment documents that have a lot of controls in them, and you can pick which kind of controls those are based that your enterprise require, and really put those against your solutioning. And then everyone asking, what can you do for us ongoing and sustaining? And then obviously the afterthought a lot of times is the incident response and threat hunting. Go ahead to the next one, Sarah or Jason. This gives you a lens real quick into where I go a couple of days a week and what's over my shoulder. This is our Houston OT Cyber Fusion Center, where we're doing ecosystems and security. So you see we have a cyber range there that represents the full energy value chain from upstream to downstream. And that specific application of it is one thing. Our security controls are in that cabinet with our partners like Mazzoni, Siren Defense, Indigi, CyberX, Palo Alto. The whole stack is in this room to be leveraged and delivered to what is a mock OT security SOC, where we can help correlate all those logs and make sense of all that data. Even though some of these cabinets here are oil and gas focused, medical focused, those kind of things, it's all the same PLCs that used across retail packaged goods, manufacturing, plant floor. So every vertical is using these types of PLCs, and they're just applying them differently. The same way OT applies IT security tools differently. Next slide there.
I would just chime in. It's a joke. Like, it's almost like you guys are doing couples counseling. In here, you bring in the OT and IT.
Yeah. So if you look
really,
at
really make it tangible.
So if you look at the far side of the room, and we do virtual sessions in here on camera with content side by side of the systems. But if you look at the far side of the room, you see the operator console. That operator console is running a full Ignition SCADA package, and those are HMI screens that control all the PLCs in the room. So we can bring field people, and then on the right you have really the corporate security or corporate operations side of the room. We can bring them in the same room and create a little empathy for what each other's role is at the company and what they're trying to accomplish in their daily task. And maybe help build that and bridge that relationship right there. So yeah, thanks for that, Jason.
Yeah, no, it's good. And, obviously we've got, the ZEDEDA stuff in there, and we're all working together, and yeah, it's cool stuff.
Yeah. So time will speed up a little here. These are the investments of the things that are in the room. So, reach out. We want to talk about any of these things. We can deep dive on that. That's just a few of the partners we have. Keep going to the next slide. The IoT rig you saw on the left in that room, I just thought I would showcase that since we're talking about industrial IoT. So sensor to cloud, AI-driven optimization. So working with a startup company there, PeopleFlow, who's delivering this solution where they're digitizing the plant floor, right? So optimization of fixed motors without being intrusive in the current PLC process or how the current system is plumbed, right? They just bolt onto the motor. And then this was just an example for you. So in this room, we have, working with our Industry X vertical Accenture, the business driver and the business reason, which you see right there, 250 fixed motors in a plant returning over $3 million in savings and 36,000 ton carbon footprint reduction, not to mention pump system reliability. Then we can deep dive into the IoT edge experience. What's running that solution, right? what is it like for that edge computer, that PLC, and that VFD in that box, and what is its connection and integration with the cloud? So we have a session where we go over that whole experience, real world scale device onboarding, device orchestration and integrations, and then how you achieve that zero trust. Jason, I don't know if you want to elaborate on anything.
Oh, I mean, that's great. I mean, this just really makes it tangible. And the one thing I'll add, so everyone will get the slides. This is recorded, but at the same time, we'll send a case study. So People Flow, as he mentioned, we have a case study that they did with ZEDEDA. Again, we're all working together. It shows they're using Azure IoT Hub. We recently announced from a ZEDEDA standpoint that we're integrated with Azure IoT to kind of simplify that whole experience with Azure IoT Edge. So it's just kind of how all this stuff's coming together. Makes it a little bit more tangible. So good stuff.
Yep. Real quick, this is a lens. That's not the only Cyber Fusion Center range we have. We have one focused on power gen and T&D in Washington, D.C. And Essen, we have a utilities range. And then Bilbao, it's renewables. So, and that's not even all of them, but that gives you perspective of the scale of where we're doing this innovation with people and showing them the solution and the ecosystems. Go to the next one. This is just some of the things we're offering in OT security. You said you'll see these things. So, start with program development, where that leads to, lots of other things underneath there. You can go ahead and go to the next one. I know we're getting short here. This one, I just wanted to, I think this is the last one we'll put in here. Really want to show you, for an edge device, there's a double click into every one of these boxes, right? And this really starts to give you a lens of what am I trying to do in my organization and what is the effective security I can apply to a device based on its constraints, right? So you see in the lighter blue, that's a heavily constrained device, maybe doesn't have TPM, maybe those kind of things aren't present on it. And then you move up into more optimized device where you can, really get the security that you want and the telemetry you want. And then you move into more high-end computing devices or more feature-rich devices. And then you can achieve that real zero trust from end-to-end edge cloud that you want. So that's something else we go over there. I don't know if you want to elaborate any of those things, Jason, or pretty close here trying.
No, I mean, we want to jump to Q&A, but I mean, the key point here for, I think, everyone tuning in is it takes a village. We're providing that sort of rock solid foundation, from a hardware standpoint, with the Lanner portfolio. ZEDEDA is just about that, management and security at that foundational level, tapping into the hardware. No one size fits all solution, and there's all these different tools in the kit. And then, of course, from an Accenture security standpoint, it's like helping people navigate those complex things. And as we said, give people the confidence to connect, formally unconnected systems, drive new business outcomes, but do it in an appropriate way. The other thing I'll say is, as it takes a village, it's not just about us. We're also with a lot of other providers that build additional complementary applications on top. I mean, Chris, you mentioned Azomi and CyberX. We've been deploying things directly into factories. But from that standpoint, it's about protocol inspection, threat detection in the OT sense. Juniper Networks, they have virtual firewalls like VSRX that we're able to deploy from our app store. So all of these different tools that build on top of that foundation that we're providing from a hardware and a orchestration standpoint. It's important. It's important to kind of consider things holistically. So I think with that, I would just say this is all about balancing OT and IT needs. As you said, empathizing across the board. Sometimes it's not going to. It's one misnomer is like OT always says this and IT always says that. I think it's really just about focusing on the capabilities required, making sure that things are usable, and just enabling the needs of the different types of jobs that you're going to be doing or roles that you'll be doing within that broader solution. Very, very comprehensive offer here, modular, open. We really believe in that need to not only prevent lock-in, but the other reason why open matters, I don't know if I mentioned this, is if you have a proprietary solution out in the field for that bare metal foundation, like what EvoOS provides in this scenario, you have to pick up the phone to support every piece of fragmented, infrastructure out there. It's impossible, because once you get out of the data center, it's very, very messy. With that open foundation, we can share that support version in addition to having that transparency that gets you to the long-term goal of more and more interconnected ecosystems. Get away from just intranets of things to true Internet of Things in that sense. So anyway, so I know we're at time. In terms of just jumping over to questions, Sarah, do we have some questions that we want to dive into?
Yeah, we do. And actually, Jason, let's start with a couple regarding EVOS, since you just finished talking about the value of open, right? So I think these two, Jason, are going to be directed to you. The first one, can EVOS be hosted on off-the-shelf industrial PCs that can run Ubuntu and function as an edge hardware?
Yeah, so EVOS can run on anything. On an industrial PC, absolutely. The minimum requirements to get all the benefits for like the AB partition and whatnot, there's embedded hypervisor, universal support, is 2 cores and about 512 megs of memory and storage. Anything there up to the fringes of the data center, no problem. Regarding Ubuntu, so EVOS is the OS, so that would actually sit. If you want to use Ubuntu as a guest OS, then great, you put that in the VM. Any applications you've qualified with, your Ubuntu, or maybe you're using Yocto or otherwise, that would be exactly the same OS stack. You just put in a VM and go. And the other benefit, because EVOS is bare metal, is we actually pass through the I/O virtualization to where literally you can have drivers within that guest OS that see the hardware as like straight in. So just that EVOS shim provides you this easy button for any kind of application stack, native containers, Kubernetes clusters or otherwise, Windows apps directly on that bare metal. Another question?
Yeah, thank you. So the other Eve question was, is there a free tier plan for IoT developers to try out EVOS Edge subscription service?
Yeah. So we're actually working on that now. So within Project Eve and LF Edge, go to GitHub, download EVOS, contribute to the community, no problem. There's a variety of ways to get involved. And there's even a basic open source controller within Project Eve, because Eve OS without some sort of controller that uses those APIs, not a lot you can do with it. I mean, you kind of hand code into it, but it's designed as that foundation. From a ZEDEDA standpoint, we're going to be rolling out the concept of dev kits here shortly, where you literally can get a free trial account, go explore, with our console, develop an app. Because let's face it, the way this stuff works is you start with a use case in mind. What outcome do I want? Then you're like working on an application. You're deploying that. What's the right application? You're not even thinking in many cases about security and management if you're starting kind of a new project. Once you get past a POC, and then you're like, oh, how do I actually scale this thing? So this is kind of the typical greenfield deal. In the brownfield sense, a lot of the stuff that the guys are doing, like in terms of coming in and helping to build out a security strategy for your existing infrastructure, it's a little bit of a different model. But yeah, we want to go enable developers to build on top of the EVOS foundation, get to hello world really quick, build the right apps, including stuff from our app store, but also do it in a way that you don't have to reinvent the foundation, on the tail end.
That's great. Thank you. And then Ahmed, does Lanner have devices with SD-WAN capabilities?
Yes, we do. And this is one of the businesses that we support under the network computing and the telecommunications. It would be nice, Sarah, if you can get that person contacts, and it can get them kind of connected with the right group within Lanner and share with them some product information.
Okay, great, Ahmed, we can do that. And then Ahmed, another one, do the OT devices that you're talking about provide IO that is 0 to 10 VDC, 0 to 20 MA, relay contact, thermistors, etc.?
So the devices we're talking about today for ET are geared more towards the data aggregation and programmability analysis. They could be like, ingesting data from some of the field devices, but we would need to get the specifics of those intelligent devices, right? Again, we need to probably connect with that participant and kind of like collect more information. But in general, yes.
Yeah, I guess the point would be,
We could,
like for you guys is you can run on top of any external IO, that's doing, data acquisition and whatnot. But yeah, and there's a lot of different types, but that's why it's important to have that, flexible foundation.
exactly. And I was going to say, most of the time the data ingestion is kind of like software driven. It really depends on the software runs on the computer, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then Chris, one for you. How is industrial IoT being applied to current OT networks in the traditional Purdue model?
So if you're not working with your OT group, then some kind of cellular APN or another way that you may not know about or even detecting, right? If you are working with your OT group, I touched on that a little bit earlier. When it comes time to scale, and they look, really just depends on how mature a company is in their OT journey, right? And if they have some standards and some things set, it may be really easy for them to architect that in and go from there. But if they're not on that journey and they're really flat, then it's kind of what we talked about is start visiting that zones and conduits model, so that you can reduce that friction and deployment inhibitor and get that the link to that conduit you need, but you can secure that IoT range, and then you can kind of profile the risk of, you might have vendor IoT, you might have your IoT, you may have third-party IoT. So however that's working, I would say the answer to that question is, if you're working with those teams, start looking at some zones and conduit architectures to accommodate that technical debt of whatever's going on in the OT network.
And I'll add, I mean, exactly. And we've been working with like a major manufacturer, that wanted to get data out of the factory, kind of do an industrial IoT project. The process system, obviously that needs to run as it is. There's a lot of existing equipment, dropped in compute just above that. What attracted them to the solution was not only that hardware root of trust, the measured boot, remote attestation, I am what I am, and I'm running what I'm supposed to be running as a node, but also the segmentation, because you need to protect the process at all costs, maximize uptime and whatnot. But the ability to segment data as it flows through from the OT side to the IT side was really, really attractive from that solution standpoint. And we actually, in that case, we deployed CyberX as well, as that protocol inspection on top. So, these projects usually get started with in this case, it was great because it was IT and OT working together. We went through an extensive security audit, but yeah, you got to meet the needs of both sides and kind of start with like a basic solution, and then you can grow from there. But you've got to build it on a foundation that has the core needs and the flexibility. Sarah, other questions?
Yep. Just a couple last ones that we can squeeze in here. So on that note, Jason, is security what's holding back industrial IoT solutions?
What's funny, so I actually, the top two challenges with industrial IoT have nothing to do with technology. It's use case. Is there a reason to do it? Second one is people. Not my job, that scares me. I don't have the skills, whatnot. So you can't underestimate the people part. Then it's fragmentation, but that's getting better. We're getting the more consolidated infrastructure and openness matters. Then it's security and management. If you don't solve the first three problems, you're not doing anything. So you don't have a security problem. So I think to a certain extent, security is holding back some people, with fears. I think part of that though is just because it's complex. And so why we're working together here is to provide all the tools you need to demystify security. Again, give you the confidence to connect, and then just go focus on business outcomes.
Got it. And then just one last question here. Ahmed, this one's for you. What are the Lanner competencies to support the IoT ecosystem with industrial grade security hardware?
Great question. Thanks, Sarah. So we talked about the different level of the cybersecurity when we convert, or integrate the IT and OT. So we talked about what we call the bedrock of security, starting from the device security, right? Just to making sure that you have that predefined list of actions for the device operation. Then we talked about the network access, and Jason and Chris kind of touched on that already, in terms of the accessibility and making sure that you have authorized people access in the network. And then as we scale things up, which is like, really normal in IoT. So we're talking about like, that secure infrastructure. So Lanner helped the ecosystem to build that like, secure industrial IoT with purpose-built kind of security devices. So starting, like I said, from the hardware root of trust to additional functionality to kind of like, control maybe the interfacing ports, right? To deactivate inactive ports and whatnot. So the different competencies that we offer, and the one thing that really differentiates Lanner, like I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, is the domain expertise in the cybersecurity, right? So it helps us to kind of like identify some of the gaps and cross-reference some of our expertise as we build or help our clients kind of build the OT/IT platform.
All right, great. Thank you. And on that note, for those of you whose questions we didn't get to, I will follow up via email once we conclude today. And we're at time, so thank you, all of you, for joining the webinar today. You'll receive a copy of the slides as well as a link to the on-demand version that'll probably be sent out tomorrow. And again, thanks for joining and have a great day.
Great. Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Chris and Ahmed.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Catch you later.